All right, let's dive into the mind of one of history's most, well, controversial thinkers, Niccolo Machiavelli. For about 500 years, his ideas on how you get and keep power have been argued about, studied, and yeah, definitely used by leaders all over the world. But let's just start with the one question he's super famous for. Is it better for a leader to be loved or feared? Think about that. This single question is really at the heart of everything he wrote. And the answer he gave, it absolutely shocked people. It's a question that makes you think, what does it really take to be in charge? So who was this guy, Machiavelli? Well, he wasn't some philosopher just hanging out in an ivory tower. No way. He was a top government official, a diplomat in Florence, Italy. His whole job was to travel around, meet with kings and popes, and see with his own eyes how the messy, high-stakes game of politics was actually played. Okay, to really get what he was talking about, you have to understand the world he lived in. And that means understanding the idea of a city-state. See, back then, Italy wasn't one big country like it is today. Instead, it was this patchwork of tiny, independent city-states, like Florence, where he lived. And they were always competing, fighting, and cutting deals with each other just to survive. It was a pretty chaotic world, and that chaos really shaped his thinking. And his life? It was a total roller coaster. I mean, he climbed the ladder to a really powerful position. He served his city. He even built its first army made up of its own citizens. But then, in 1512, everything just fell apart. The government he worked for got overthrown, and boom, Machiavelli was thrown out of his job, arrested, and then exiled to his farm. And it was right there, at his lowest point, that he wrote his masterpiece, The Prince. Now you have to understand, The Prince was totally different from any other book about leadership at the time. This wasn't some fairy tale about a perfect world. Nope. It was a cold, hard, practical guide for how a ruler should act in the real world if they wanted to succeed. Think of it less like a philosophy book and more like a user's manual for power. So what was his main point? What's the one thing he kept coming back to? It's this. A leader's number one job, their top priority, is to keep the state safe and stable. He basically argued that without a strong ruler holding everything together, a country would just fall into chaos, crime, invasions, and that causes way more suffering for everyone. So everything a leader does should be aimed at that one single goal. So you might be asking, why did he think leaders needed to be so tough? Well, it's because he had a pretty cynical view of human nature. He believed that deep down, most people are selfish, ungrateful, and you just can't rely on them when things get difficult. He warned that a leader who is too trusting, well, they're just setting themselves up to be betrayed. And that brings us right back to our big question, loved or feared? Machiavelli said, look, being loved is great and all, but he saw a huge problem with it. Love depends on other people's feelings, and feelings can change in a heartbeat, right? Fear, on the other hand, that's based on the threat of punishment, which the ruler controls. So for Machiavelli, fear was just a much more reliable tool for keeping order. But, and this is a really important but, he added a critical detail. A ruler must be feared, but never, ever hated. Why? Because a hated leader inspires rebellions. People will risk literally anything to get rid of a ruler they despise. So the trick is to be strong and strict, sure, but not cruel or unjust.
To explain the two sides a leader needs, Machiavelli used this awesome analogy. He said a ruler has to be both a lion and a fox. You need the lion's strength to scare away your enemies, the wolves. But the lion, for all its power, isn't smart enough to see hidden traps. For that, you need the fox's cunning and cleverness. A leader who's only a lion or only a fox is eventually going to fail.
This all leads to his most famous and definitely most controversial idea, that the ends justify the means. What does that even mean? Well, he argued that the final result can justify the actions you took to get there. For example, is it okay for a leader to lie to an enemy if that lie prevents a war that would kill thousands of his own people? Machiavelli would say yes. The good outcome, saving all those lives, justifies the dishonest act. And this practical thinking bleeds into everything, like his advice on building an army. He was crystal clear about this. First, never, ever trust mercenaries, soldiers you hire. Their only loyalty is to their paycheck. He insisted that a ruler has to build an army from his own citizens. Why? Because people who are fighting to protect their own homes and their own families will be way more loyal and brave. On top of all this, Machiavelli was basically talking about public relations 500 years ago. He stressed how important it was for a leader to maintain a good reputation. He said, look, most people only judge by what they see on the surface, so a ruler should always appear to be honest, religious, and fair, even if, behind closed doors, they have to make some tough, maybe morally questionable decisions for the good of the state. You know, his ideas were so powerful that his name literally became part of our language. Today, when we call someone or something Machiavellian, we mean they're cunning, maybe a bit scheming, and totally focused on getting what they want, no matter what. It just goes to show how deeply his view of power as something separate from personal morality has stuck with us. And you really can't overstate his legacy. For 5 centuries, The Prince has been essential reading for anyone who wants to understand power, from kings to presidents. He completely changed the conversation, really, separating what's morally ideal from what is politically necessary. And the debates he started, we are still having them right now. Which leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Was Machiavelli a teacher of evil, basically giving leaders a permission slip to be cruel and dishonest? Or was he just a realist, maybe the first person brave enough to just write down the uncomfortable truth about how power really works? That's something that's still very much up for debate.